Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nelson Garcia, and I'm president of the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group. Our organization was created back in 2009 for the sole purpose of introducing newly arrived ambassadors, newly elected members of Congress from the key committees of jurisdiction on trade and international relations matters, and introduce them to key policymakers from both the public and private sector here in Washington, D.C. Normally, we would have these events live over at the Ronald Reagan Building in conjunction with our hosts and friends at the Office for Trade Promotion of Washington, D.C. But because of the pandemic crisis, we are currently doing webinar programs for the time being. But we are optimistic and hope to have these live events again sometime early next year. So thank you so much for bearing with us and joining us for these various programs on the webinar. And so at this point in time, I would like to go ahead and introduce the Vice President of the Office for Trade Promotion of Washington, D.C., our good friend and partners for these webinars, Andrew Joe Fuso.
Thank you, Nelson. We actually changed our name to the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C. a while back, and we're the programming arm of the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. We host policy forums, trade missions, business briefings, and trade shows. When COVID hit us in mid-March, we embarked on a Messages of Hope campaign where we facilitated messages from 48 ambassadors to the people of the U.S. with uplifting and inspirational messages. We hope that you'll take some time to visit our YouTube page to see these diplomatic messages that so far have been viewed by thousands of individuals. They're also up on our website, which is rrbitc.com. Today, we're very pleased to partner once again with the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group, or WIPG. For the past 3 years, we've worked closely to bring in members of Congress and diplomats to the Reagan Building for intimate and candid discussions on economics, tourism, trade, travel, and more. The Reagan Building and International Trade Center is located in the heart of Washington, D.C. and is run by a public-private partnership between Trade Center Management Associates and the U.S. General Services Administration. We're also part of the World Trade Center Association, a nonprofit, apolitical trade association with 300 licenses in over 90 countries. Now I'd like to turn the program back to Nelson to introduce our esteemed guest today, Undersecretary Ted McKinney.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Before I introduce the ambassador, or excuse me, the Undersecretary, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of our attendees, especially from those in the diplomatic community, and specifically His Excellency Jose Romualdez, the Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the United States of America, for joining us this morning, and other members of the staff of the Philippine Embassy. With that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs from the United States Department of Agriculture, the Honorable Ted McKinney. Mr. McKinney serves as the U.S. Department of Agriculture Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. He leads the development and implementation of the department's trade policy, oversees and facilitates foreign market access, and promotes opportunities for U.S. agriculture through various trade programs and high-level government negotiations. In 2014, Undersecretary McKinney was appointed by then-Governor Mike Pence to serve as director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, a position he held until joining USDA in 2017. His career also included 19 years with Dow AgroSciences and 14 years with Elanco, a subsidiary of Eli Lilly and Company, where he was director of global corporate affairs. His industry and civic involvement has included service on the National FFA Convention Local Organizing Committee, the Indiana State Fair Commission, and Purdue College of Agriculture Dean's Advisory Council, as well as on the boards of directors of the International Food Information Council, the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and International Federation of Animal Health. Undersecretary McKinney grew up on a family grain and livestock farm in Tipton, Indiana, and was a 10-year 4-H member and an Indiana State FFA officer. He graduated from Purdue University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Economics in 1981, and received the G.A. Ross Award as the Outstanding Senior Male Graduate. In 2002, he was named a Purdue Agriculture Distinguished Alumnus, and in 2004 received an FFA Honorary American degree. He and his wife, Julie, have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. And with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce the Honorable Ted McKinney, Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Thank you so much, Undersecretary McKinney.
Well, thank you, Nelson and Andrew, and by extension, Allison. You all have been terrific. And I so savor these opportunities partly because of COVID, although I think we've broken through the communications mix with technologies like Zoom and Teams and so many others. I still believe that dialogue is the best way to resolve issues, reach understanding, and all that goes with things like trade. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to this group. And to you, Andrew, thanks for what you do. It's so important to have a World Trade Center right in the heart of our nation's capital. And what you do, I think, to help facilitate some of that communication, if not policy and other kinds of things, is just so, so important. So thank you. Let me just share with you a little bit, just a touch more than what the bio shared on what drives me. You heard that I grew up on a crop and livestock farm, and that is still very much what drives me, and certainly that of Secretary Perdue and those of us at USDA. We're concerned about anything and everything involving food and agriculture, from the production to the processing to, in the cases of COVID, feeding kids during these difficult times, etc. But I'll tell you what gets me up every morning is knowing or thinking perhaps that I can make a difference in some farmer or rancher's life somewhere around the world. And I mean that. I shared with the Senate at my confirmation. I share with many with whom I visit, and many of you are on the line here, so to speak, that my heart and my head have always driven that trade is a two-way street, period. If I win and some other country loses, that is a short and unproductive relationship. And the same in reverse. Coming from the Midwest, we're all a happy lot. Yes, our keys still stay in our trucks and cars at night. You don't lock your doors. It's a very safe environment. Your word is your bond. And for better or worse, I have found that trade, at least in my view of the golden rule, treat others as you would have them treat unto you or do unto you, is not fair. And that is why I think the U.S. has been more aggressive than many people might have realized or experienced in the past. So I think what would work, and I've had feedback from a number of conversations with people, that when I sort of go around the world and touch on some countries and some issues, it's what gets the most feedback. You'll find that I'm pretty candid. And so I hope that we have a robust Q&A time. And I think we have plenty of time set aside for that. So my thanks, Nelson, to you and Allison and your team for doing that. Let me just start with what's facing us right now, and that's the COVID thing. The U.S. is still experiencing the issues of COVID, just as most other countries, maybe all countries around the world. And my heart and my head goes out to all of you. I think we're on the downswing now. Now, there may still be some spikes on the incidence, but certainly, most importantly, the death rate is going down. I'm not sure that's the case in all of the countries. So just know that we have been reaching out to many. I've even reached out to many of the embassies here in the U.S. saying at the time there was some shortages of toweling and toilet paper. If you need some, I'll go to bat and deliver toilet paper and tissue paper. And of course, it was with a little humor, but I meant what I said. And so that's the spirit in which we're taking this. We are working very hard to support in the right ways within WTO boundaries, our farmers and our consumers. Clearly, a lot of time spent by my colleagues in the food and nutrition services with our SNAP program. This would be the programs that allow people to get food some way or another, whether it's a school program, a summer feeding program, stopping by a food bank, and they have just been superb. And lots of that has been through the recent box program, where it's loaded with certain meats and dairy and all, it's a balanced nutrition according to my plate. And so that's been very, very good. In my world, yes, my goal of reaching 1 million miles, as was the goal set by Secretary Perdue, came to a screeching stop, but it hasn't stopped the outreach. And so I don't know that there's going to be very much good that comes out of COVID, But one thing I think is good is platforms like this. Yep, there'll still be a lot of get on a plane, go to a trade show, meet face to face, eyeball to eyeball, test products. That's all going to continue. But I think we've introduced a new tool through Zoom and like programs where we can stay in touch and maybe, just maybe, even be in touch with more people. So I'm bullish. You'll also find that I'm pretty optimistic. So whether it's on the farm, living my creed as my faith, you know, the bonds and the logos and the mottos of groups like 4-H and FFA that I was such a part of, you'll also find that I'm very anxious to reach consensus with people around the world. So here we go. So COVID is, I think, getting managed. We hope, and we've pushed and pushed and pushed, that trade continues. We found out in the recessions, really a world recession of 2008, that where countries might understandably want to protect the goods and the foods that they have and shut down the borders, oh my goodness, did it make it worse. And prices rose around the world and created more harm than good. So trade, and good and honest trade, wins out just about every time, even when it might be counterintuitive to think about that. So more questions can come on COVID if you wish. The second one on some negotiations. I think we're very pleased with how the negotiations are going with the UK now. I think most of you know that my good friends at USTR lead those negotiations, but many do not know that USDA, with its numerous economists and trade specialists, outnumber USTR usually 2, 3, 4 to 1. And so we're the ones that usually do a lot of the strategization, numbers and figures, possibilities, contingency planning, all the options. So we're on the phone daily with our friends at USTR, and we're very excited about the UK and where that agreement might come. And I get a sense that they're excited as well about where this might go. And I think it's just reflective of what we try to do with so many countries or regions around the world. So we'll look forward to that. I don't envy our friends in UK. I don't know how many negotiations you have going on at any one time, but I think it's at least 3 or 4. So good luck to that. That's not easy. The negotiations continue with Kenya as well. There was a little bit of a slowdown because several members of the Kenya negotiating team also got caught with COVID. I don't think there are any deaths that have come out of that, thank goodness. But we're very excited, and all of the US, and you've probably read of this, I mean, all of US government and industry are placing a re-energized and renewed focus on Africa. First, I think it's the right thing to do, not just because of COVID, but I think that makes it even more pronounced. How do we help our sistern and our brethren around the world? And I think that's one. But also it seems like much of Africa, with the African Union and the continent-wide free trade agreement amongst their own members, seems like it's a place that really is ready to do even more business. So to our friends from Africa that are either on the line now or might look at it later, count us as all in. We're ready to go. Those negotiations started on February 6th, and I think the first round commenced. We might be in the second or third round now, but we're very excited. And it doesn't stop with Kenya. That's perhaps the most important point. There seemed to be agreement that Kenya might be the first country in which to start, but the intent is for that model to extend more broadly. And so for the continent of Africa, where I frankly have been working a lot on Codex kinds of things. Codex is a part of our family of businesses here at USDA. We understand the importance of Africa and are doubling down on that. Just a word, as with many of the embassies around the world, we too brought back a number of our citizens. Now, they came back largely when COVID might have been more pronounced in other countries, and it was less so here. Well, it came here just as it seems to be traversing around the world, but we're finding our way back to those countries. Slowly but surely, we're getting most of our people back to China. I think there's a couple more plane loads of people that might go back, but we're working hard on that. As countries open up, and even before, we're pressing the boundaries because we know how important that is. And it's the same thing as the relationship we have with many of those in embassies here in the US, in Washington, or in consulates, we know the value of being right there in the backyard, the back door, and visiting personally. So we're trying as much as those countries allow to get all of our people back. And we're excited about that. You may or may not know that we have a presence, American citizen presence of 1, 2, or many more people in 98 embassies around the world. And we have locally employed staff, and your colleagues in your countries who work for us are just terrific. You develop them well, and they are just the backbone of my foreign ag service. And so I'm so grateful to them. We have them in all of those 98 and in another 30 or 35. So the footprint around the world is quite significant, as you might have imagined. And we're doubling down on that just because there's so much churn in trade these days, whether it's the rise of populism and therefore some protectionism. We're trying to remake the WTO in so many ways. Just the usual to and fro, ups and downs, ins and outs, and frustrations with trade. So I want to just let you know that for those that might have seen an exodus, it's not a permanent thing. We are trying very hard to get them back. I want to just take a little extra time to focus on my very, very good friends with Europe. Now, just so you know, I love Europe. It was the first foreign country that I visited, even beyond Canada and beyond Mexico, who are just to the north and south of us. My parents, my dad's side all came from Northern Ireland. We know where they came from. We know the farms. We've got it that far back. My mom's side from Scotland, up near Dumfries. Yes, we even know the castle where Sir Roger Kirkpatrick resided. So the family history has always been very rich and even validated by extended members of the family. So I celebrate that. And so I've always loved Europe. And of course, there are so many things that bind us, you know, NATO, a couple of world wars, ancestry, all of those things. But I must say, and I'm speaking directly to you and to the world, that I don't understand what's going on now. At a time when we hear the hue and the cry of US, come negotiate, let's get a free trade agreement. We've got to work together and focus on other parts of the world. I'm saying, okay, I'm in. Now, this is despite the fact that much of US agriculture is just saying to hell with you. We're had it. We've been trying to grow our exports to Europe for 6 years, and it's flat. All the while, we're buying more and more and more. The storm clouds are out there on the current agreement. Looks like we got a recent breakthrough on some seafood from the Northeast going to Europe. Fantastic, and we'll be buying some things. So despite what my friends in ag and so much of US government is saying about forget it, they're lost, the precautionary principle has a chokehold, I continue to say, no, we must try to break through. We have got to get there. Long pause, I want it to sink in. I'm all in. But at a time when we've got these clouds gathering and it's already difficult to get things done, along comes the EU Green Deal objectives, which are not bad. But you implement it by saying, we're going to cut pesticides by 50%, fertilizer by 20 or 30%, rise in organic, and do some other things. Okay, let's talk about those one at a time. I'll put my premise out here at the outset and then conclude with the same remark. Why don't you do that and celebrate innovation? Let me give you an example. You want to cut pesticides. Europe chose not to accept and introduce for its own farmers the so-called GMOs or biotech. Let me take my own family farm where we raise a lot of soybeans and corn. For many, many decades, we had seed corn, and we still have all our soybeans as seed soybeans. Let me talk about corn. Because we produce for the market, and because you and your consumers and consumers around the world have to pay more for non-biotech corn, we produce non-GMO corn. Did you know that for the last several years, we have used 0 insecticides on that corn? This is the GMO corn, 0. We have cut pesticide use, which is one of your stated goals, because we use biotech. It's built in. I've been out there running the chase cart when the combine is harvesting, and I know the difference in yield. It's about anywhere from 5% to 25% difference in yield. Yeah. Zero insecticide. The only time we had to use some here recently was when the awful, awful fall armyworm caught our farm in much of the Midwest. And yet 2 years later, we had it whipped because biotech does a much better job on fall armyworm than pesticides of any sort. We reduced insecticide use dramatically, improved yield, fixed a nasty critter over 2 years. And yet we know that fall armyworm is ravaging much of Africa. We know it's in China. I think it's in other areas. So why is there continued resistance to new innovation and technology to solve these problems? I've talked to many in Africa. I've been there. They want to use the technologies that the world is providing, and yet they can't because much of their exports are to Europe, and Europeans say, nope, you use that and you're not allowed to export. And that's what they've told me. I've heard that personally. Let's talk about fertilizer usage. We're down in our fertilizer usage. Used to be, and I used to do this on the farm, so I know what I'm speaking of. We used to have technologies that the same rate would be applied. So you had a certain amount of nitrogen usually, always phosphorus and potassium. And because you didn't have variable rate, you put the same amount on the hills as you did down in the richer soils. And you don't need to do that. Well, we have 2 high boy sprayers, and I want you to know when it gets to the hill, because we use digital satellite technology, we shut off the potassium when it starts to go up a hill because it's not needed. And then it comes back on because we sample every 5 feet and we know our soils on 5 by 5 foot grids. We have reduced fertilizer usage significantly by adopting modern technology. So I do not understand, and the world does not understand. I can't tell you how many calls I've received from other countries that say, why is Europe doing this? We want to export, we want to trade, and yet here is the methodology that seems to be chosen. And finally, as I've been told by many in Europe, you're choosing to do this without even having brought in farmers on that strategy. And I understand, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I understand your Commissioner of Agriculture was not part of deciding upon and developing the Farm to Fork initiative. So I've got to share, heart to heart, head to head, please rethink the strategy. We will work with you. We'll share our technology. We're going to double down on farmer exchanges so you can see that many of those same goals can be met. If you just wanted to do this for Europe, that's one thing. We don't want to be in the business of telling you how to do your work, as long as it's fair trade. But we know what you do. You tell your own farmers they can't use it, and then you say, nor can any farmer around the world use those pesticides, use those practices. And that's not fair. So welcome, come on in, jump in the pool. The water's warm. You're going to find that adopting technology can work and meet your goals as good or better than perhaps the current goals of Farm to Fork. I don't even want to think what it's going to do for trade. It's just going to make it a disaster. And so any desire to do trade with the US, and I dare say with other countries, it's going to be hard. And I'll tell you the final thing that gets under my skin. I grew up giving speeches. Maybe you can see the 4-H, the celebration of 4-H. It's a youth organization, and I chose to do public speaking. I loved it. It's been a benefit to me. And my dad encouraged me to, why don't you talk about the green revolution of the 1970s? This is when famine set in Bangladesh and parts of Asia Pacific. Maybe some of those countries are on the line here today. So I gave a couple, 3 speeches about the green revolution. I spoke about Norman Borlaug, who I came to know before he passed. His granddaughter Julie is a great friend of mine now. And so my growing up was really about producing the food that the world will consume so that we can produce good, nutritious, healthy food and do it for the entire world, not just those that can afford it. So very quickly, let me say, this talk is not anti-organic. I did more work to support organic in my Director of Ag role than many had. I spent more time there than anything else, and glad to have done it because many of them were new farmers. So I celebrate any kind of production somebody wants. But on the goals that we have, where we're wanting to take organic and make it the world's accepted form, we will move back to famine and starvation. as big an advocate as I am of our organic farmers, I'm looking to move more exports, move more imports. We will not address the 10 or 9 billion people. So we're on our way from 7.3 billion on the planet now to 9 or 10. And we know a lot of those are Africa, Asia Pacific. India will no doubt be a big part of that. So yes, if this is a heartfelt plea to rethink farm to fork, it is exactly my request, because it's going to only bring enormous problems and we will not solve the world's problems. Innovation is the answer. It is the answer. So I'll stop there, get off my pulpit here and just say I am open to any and all discussions from people around the world, particularly my good friends in Europe. And let's go solve problems together and keep trade moving and enhance trade, not shut it down and lock it away. So Nelson, I thank you and Andrew again, and I'm delighted to take questions for as long as you and the people have.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary McKinney. For the audience who wish to submit questions, there is a link at the bottom of your screen that you can pull up under Q&A, and please feel free to submit your questions using that link, and we will read it out to the Undersecretary throughout the remainder of this program. I'll have the first question, Undersecretary. I think one of the issues that impact the United States is the lack of participation of the United States, I guess, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and how that impacts U.S. Export as well as imports, I guess, on the agricultural area, and what you foresee the U.S. role is in the absence of being a full-time member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and how we circumnavigate that issue with regards to exports and imports of agricultural products.
Sure. Great question, Nelson. Well, first of all, let's go back to our last presidential campaign. The president felt very strongly that, as written, it was not fair. It may have been fine for ag, so we have to look beyond agriculture, where I think it probably would have been a good deal, and look at other things. And I think autos was particularly what was under the president's skin, and he said this, I mean, this was not a surprise. He talked about this in the campaign. So I think stepping out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership was much more of a non-ag related than ag related. That said, I think we've made a lot of headway to get back, or very, very close to that, notably through the light free trade agreement, if you can call it that, that we developed and signed with Japan. And we're hopeful that there might be a phase 2 to that. We also had a number of agreements already in place with many of the other countries. So though there is still work to do, I believe the answer, direct answer, is the president wanted to see fairness on all kinds of commerce, not just agriculture. Now, the other thing I've got to say is many people around the world, and certainly many of my colleagues, whether it's in Indiana or other farmers and ranchers I speak with on a weekly basis, thought that TPP was a done deal. I have heard from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that it was not going to pass the US Congress. I don't know if that's true, and maybe we never will because it didn't get that chance. But I just want to make sure people know that I've been told by both sides of the aisle that it was not going to pass. So why focus a great deal on it other than it had some good language that was a template? And I think some of that language has been used in the Japan agreement, and certainly I've used it as we talk with other countries. So good model. The multilateralism was a terrific example of how groups can come together, but the world seems to be moving a bit more back to some bilateralism. So that's the best I can do on that without having President Trump on here to give additional rationale, Nelson.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Andrew, I believe you have a question?
Yeah, the next question, Undersecretary. You mentioned that you have staff in 98 embassies. I was curious how big the Foreign Agricultural Service is and how COVID-19 has impacted the operations, if it has, of the Foreign Agricultural Service and your role specifically. Sure.
Oh gosh, well, we're trying to hire more and have been for years. So I couldn't give you the exact number, but I can answer the latter part of the question. Yes, COVID has affected everyone. I would say the one thing that I have seen the most is the inability to speak directly to my counterparts, particularly in person, and even some constraint on methodologies like we're on now. And there was good reason for that. Many countries of the world, ours included, were so focused on doing right by the people of each country with COVID. Get people fed, keep trade moving. The list is long. But it was a bit of a timeout call that said, look, let's focus. We've got a crisis here in all of our countries. Let's focus on our own people and we'll get back to that. And we are. That said, I took that time to really do deep dives with all of our commodity groups. We call them cooperators. So think of the folks that export corn, beef, pork, poultry, DDGs, fruits, nuts, all of it. We've had terrific discussions there. We've gotten more innovative. We've figured out new ways to do business. We've finished some strategies on some areas of the world that we've been focusing on. I've spent some wonderful time on this technology with ambassadors here in the US from other countries, and so I'm grateful for that time. But now, particularly since it seems like we're still not going to be able to get on planes and travel freely country to country, we're picking back up using technologies like this with people in country. And so that's how it's affected us. Now, for those that were foreign service officers in country, many of them, not all, but many of them came home as was directed by the State Department. Whether they had a choice or not, they came back. They've done work as best they can from wherever they were. Many of them were here. Some of them went to see mom and dad and in-laws. And so they've worked it. I mean, they've been working at night while we work at day, depending on the time zone in which they had been posted. So you try your best to do that, but it's just not quite the same. So in that sense, they've reconnected with people back here, refamiliarized with all the intricacies of USDA and the programs that we have. And so we've just made it work. But for sure, we're very anxious to get going. I will say that ag trade missions or trade missions generally, by virtue of Zoom or like technologies, is proven pretty exciting. You know, it's not going to be the same, but boy, you can reach a lot of people. And so we have seen great success by groups, for example, like our Soybean Export Council, our wines and spirits entities, many of them small, have done virtual tours. Some have even sent sample product to those who would be participating, me included, and I enjoyed that very much. We did it late in the day so that, you know, if I'm sampling some new distilled spirit, I had all my faculties for the rest of the calls. But it was just, it's one of the only positive things I see coming out of COVID, okay?
Okay, Undersecretary, a question has come. Now that Taiwan is lifting its beef and pork restrictions, do you think a free trade agreement is possible with Taiwan? And I want to add a little bit, because of the sensitivity with the agreements between the United States and China on agricultural purchasing as part of the agreement between the two countries. Will any potential free trade agreement with Taiwan impact the agreements that has already been agreed upon with China?
Sure. Well, I try to follow a rule of not speculating. So the honest answer on the question of, is there going to be a free trade agreement with Taiwan? I don't know. I don't think so at this point. I think there's always been understanding that where you can break down barriers to trade, you do that. And we've been doing that around the world in all sizes, shapes, and forms. And I think that's what's taken place with Taiwan. I mean, I worked on some of the Taiwan issues back when I was in the private sector 5-6 years ago. So it's evidence that these are longstanding, and you're always trying to whittle away at those. So I don't know, and I don't think so. That would be the responsibility of USTR, you know, up to the president. We're also very respectful of the relationship, the Taiwan and China relationship. So the honest answer is I don't know, but we're always trying to whittle away on issues like the ones we got resolved, and we're very pleased with that, and we think Taiwan will benefit from that. In terms of the China agreement, well, so far so good. will not know till December 31st. You know, the year one of the 2-year phase one agreement does not end till December 31. Many think it ends at the end of the U.S. government fiscal year, which is September 30th. It does not. It's December 31. And historically, we must remember that a lot of the trade from the U.S. goes that last quarter, maybe the last 5 months. And so, you know, we're starting to get close to that. Our impression right now is that China intends to honor phase one. And we're pleased with that. And I think the last few weeks, months of trade are showing that. Certainly, they're purchasing products that they really need: pork, beef, poultry, so the proteins, and then crops that might feed their repopulating of the swine herds, the growing poultry flocks there, and beef as they have it. So I think there's a desire to see some additional diversity in the purchasing. But, you know, after what we saw going on with COVID there and then COVID here, remember the Lunar New Year was right in that mix. Many people thought that phase one starts January 16. The day after, there would be these immediate sales. No. We had to take 2 months to resolve more than 24 technical agreements. So to leave on a very positive and complimentary note, neither China nor my colleagues in the Food Safety Inspection Service or the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service missed a single deadline on something like a couple of dozen technical agreements. My colleagues were on digital video conferences like this at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m., 6 p.m., and they lasted several hours. And likewise, our friends in China were on those as well in their kind of odd time. Didn't miss a single deadline. And so that was evidence to us that they're very serious about it. And so as long as we're continuing to see the growth, love to again see some of the diversity in purchases, we'll remain more optimistic than not. That said, 36.5 billion is a lot, and there's some catching up to do, but all in all, we're going to give them that chance to meet that. We still have a few months to go.
Great, thank you. Andrew?
Okay, the next question that came in, and I know you mentioned Africa and the Continental Free Trade Agreement in your remarks, is how does Prosper Africa fit with the work that you're doing in Africa? Is the coordination of the various U.S. government agencies working, and how can we improve?
Sure. Well, I think it is working. It is working well. Now, is that to say that it's perfect? No. You know, when you get the size of government, any government, and the diversities and the different interests, that there's always room for improvement, but I think it's going well. As an example, we're going over to the Export-Import Bank today. We just collaborated on some wonderful opportunities that Iraq might provide. So we are flat after it. Maybe one of the good things of having such a great agency, and Foreign Ag Service is just the best. I remember as I was coming into this job in late 2017, my statement to my wife and to the FAS is, I just hope and pray I don't screw up a good thing. So a lot of my work is on the interagency. That's what we're supposed to do. And I think that's going well. And absolutely, we want to lift that up. You know, I think the humanitarian aspect of helping Africa along is very much a part of our DNA. You heard me earlier talk about the golden rule. Our faith in many cases is very much a part of that. A lot of the problems of the past, like corruption and things, though still there, I think has subsided a great deal. They've asked for the US and other countries to come in a great deal more. So I'm very excited. In fact, one of my frustrations with COVID is it's probably interrupted at least 2 trips to Africa, maybe more. So yeah, Prosper Africa is very much something we're a part of. We'd probably be leading that given our interface with Foreign Ag Service. And, you know, we're looking and working through our people at post. And as we're always churning, there's always a move of people from post to post. And we are certainly putting some very talented people there so that we do right out of the chute. I'm very excited, if you can't tell.
Thank you.
Undersecretary, I know you touched earlier on the problems African countries are facing with regards to their exports to Europe because of the GMO issue and pesticides and things of that nature. But between the United States and Africa, will the future negotiations between the United States and Kenya on a free trade agreement bring breakthroughs on the African front regarding GMO adoption and other technology uses regarding agriculture. So I guess specifically on the bilateral side between Africa and the United States.
Sure. Well, this is probably what needs the most work. I mean, as we go back over the decades, there's many, many, many reasons why we're not doing more. It's not bad, but we've got to do more. Again, I mentioned that things like theft and corruption and all that. We heard from many businesses years ago, not so much now, that when they get their product to port, they better expect to, hand over something. That is in the past for the largest part. But that was a big, big barrier. How do you tell somebody, do more business with Africa, we'll support you with it, and then, things like that are encountered. But again, with emphasis that that's much, much more in the rearview mirror, we're excited. They have asked us to come in and be a greater part. And we are, not just in trade, but in some of the regulatory reform that they themselves are seeking. They want diversity. China has been a very, very large presence in many parts of Africa. Good for them. They've asked for us to come in and make sure that they're given a choice. We agree with that. And furthermore, I think a lot of the African countries are rising in their class. Many are entering the middle class, COVID aside, and so now can have purchasing power to buy those products. All I can close by saying is we are an open partner. We're more than willing to do trade, and we're thrilled with where the African continent and its various countries have come from and are going to. So we're along for the ride and then some.
Andrew?
Okay. The next question that came in is regarding USMCA. Now that USMCA is in force, can you discuss the agency's approach to enforcement of new ag provisions, such as increased access to Canada's supply managed dairy sector, Mexican cheese labeling, etc.? What does USDA and other federal agencies intend to do differently compared to enforcing of NAFTA?
Sure. Well, let me just start with USMCA, and I'll plead guilty. I was one of those early on that said, oh my gosh, from an ag perspective, don't blow it up, don't get rid of it. It's been great for trade across all three countries, and I think that still stands true. But as it's done, I think it has been improved in many areas, or at least it has the potential to. We're still early. It only went live July 1. So we're going to see. I think the best part of USMCA is some of the least well-known part, and that was the rewrite of the phytosanitary chapter. SPS issues are always, or nearly always, the big blockade where countries will hide behind some concern. My favorite is GMOs in parts of the world. Oh, we're concerned about that. I remember I was very actively involved in that in the year 2000, and remember, biotech only came along in 1996. And I heard from different parts of the world, oh, we need 10 years to really assess the safety. Folks, GMOs are safe. They are a great benefit for those in the world that are using them. So let's get past that and maybe start accepting technologies. So we rewrote SPS so that there is less opportunity to hide behind things that have been proven scientifically safe, but are alleged to be unsafe. That is not the way to do world trade. So that rewrite really addresses that. For the first time ever in a trade agreement, there's a biosciences chapter that can address things like GMOs. And more importantly, one of the greatest opportunities that I think that will benefit the world is gene editing. And I mean in human health, in animal health, and in plant health. And there's still questions about whether even gene editing, with all the safeties that are known about that, are going to be accepted. So that's the beauty of the biosciences chapter. And we hope to introduce that language wherever anybody wants to use it. Hey, borrow from it. Two countries are going to do a deal, have at it, use the language. And certainly we are looking at that. In terms of the dairy question and enforcement, well, that's the beauty of USMCA. We now have much, much more specific language and provisions to look at that. And frankly, you can tell if there's cheating going on. We hope that our friends in Canada do not do that. Now, they pulled a fast one in reallocating their TRQs on dairy to their own industry. Boy, not in the spirit of USMCA. And so things like that will have to be dealt with, but the provisions are there. And so we're watching very, very, did I say very? Very carefully to see if our friends to the north and the south, just as with our friends around the world, are you going to abide by, and are you going to be honest and keep your word? You know, let's don't play games. And I hope others hold us accountable, and many have. I've heard it right, straight, clear, and professionally from people, and that's fine. You know, I can take it if I can give it. And so I think that's what we got to have, is the frank discussions. But right now, I'd say the short answer is provisions are there to enforce that, and we're watching.
Okay. Undersecretary, a question regarding country of origin. I know Congress has been trying to address that issue, and expressed their concerns about the origins of especially food products imported into the United States. Can you speak a little bit about where we are when it comes to country of origin provisions among trade agreements, and what are the practices right now regarding that?
Sure. Well, I think we, and maybe even other countries around the world, learned the hard way when we had the country of origin labeling program with our livestock, and particularly with Canada, where there's so much back and forth, as you want it to be. I think that's the spirit of good free trade. I think we've learned, and by the way, a WTO lawsuit to help remind us that is not the way to go about things. The difficulty with cool is that it sounds neat, it sounds sexy, it certainly sounds politically popular, but when you get into the weeds of how it functions, it can be not quite so attractive, even perhaps disastrous. And I think that's what many of us, I included, were saying even when we had it with our livestock. I think the best solution is a program like my friends in the Ag Marketing Service have. For those groups, for those industries that want to do something voluntarily, not mandated, perfect, you know, they fund it. It's a voluntary kind of thing. There's not enforcement by government that you have to do it that way. That seems to be the happy medium that we've reached, at least in my understanding, with discussions with our friends to the north and south, Canada and Mexico. But mandatory cool systems can be a really, really slippery slope. And once country A does it to country B feels like they've got to do something back against country A, and we just get into this really messy to and fro. That is not the spirit of trade. So if it has to come, there are ways, it seems to me, that it can be done without being forced and mandated at a government level.
Thank you. Andrew, last question.
All right, here's a question that came in. The food processing industry is facing a shortage of carbon dioxide because of the drop in ethanol production. Now we are seeking imports of carbon dioxide to meet domestic requirements. This appears to be counter to U.S. policy of encouraging domestic production. What else can we do?
Oh my, somebody, that sounds like somebody I've talked to here recently. Well, I think the best solution for us is just to get the ethanol sales, and therefore the DDG sales, going. And oh my gosh, the opportunities for ethanol. For those countries that have not used ethanol, particularly if you've got a problem with cleanliness of air in cities, this can be your answer. And I know this firsthand. I grew up in Indiana. Gary, Indiana, up near Chicago, is where a lot of steel mills were then and still are. I used to traipse through there on the way up to visit Chicago, and man, oh man, you went through some pretty foul air. Not at all the case. You can hardly tell. Anything coming out of stacks is just simply water vapor. So I know that it can fix, not to mention it improves fuel efficiency in vehicles, notwithstanding what many industries say that it's going to ruin our engines. That is not the case. Certainly not with autos and trucks that have been manufactured in the last many, many years. So our answer is, and we're working like crazy, it's my #1 topic, is to see if we can see about other countries buying more ethanol. We've got an issue going on with Brazil. and we know they have an enormous demand. We'd love to see ethanol sales return to previous levels with our friends in Brazil. We know, because China already has it on their books, that using more ethanol is in the mix. Wouldn't have to change a law or a regulation for them to be purchasing more ethanol. We hope for that. Mexico, we believe, based on our own analysis, could be an enormous beneficiary of E10 ethanol, not just to clean up cities, but to really help their own ethanol industry. But these things take time, and you don't want to be heavy-handed, and that's not the way I am. And so you have to do studies and sell the benefits. Sometimes the politics have to cycle through, but that's the way that we'd like to see it handled. And then always, always innovation. I mean, there's some bright young university student out there somewhere around the world that's going to uncover new and valuable uses for ethanol or CO2. And we're going to find that the benefits that I know to exist will grow and be sustained. So it's an all the above strategy. I've just listed a couple of opportunities, Andrew. To whoever asked that, it was an excellent question.
Let me ask this last question in the short amount of time we have left. Undersecretary, this came in. What are your insights about the agricultural agenda of the United States to Latin America? I know you just mentioned Brazil. Taking into account that this region is fairly self-sufficient in agricultural production.
Yes, good point. Well, first of all, the Western Hem, for the most part, is an incredible unit. And we have agreements with many of them. There's the CAFTA-DR, the Central America Free Trade Agreement, Dominican Republic. And then there is Mexico is, of course, part of that. So we already have a lot. But I'll tell you what, I think the lesson learned here through USMCA is don't forget your friends. And I don't think we did, but it causes you to double down on that. So I've actually spent a lot of time in Central South America. And if I had lost 2 trips to Asia Pacific, I've lost 4 trips because of COVID to my friends down south. I suspect more of my conversations are with countries in Western Hem. Lots of times they're through industry groups or association groups like IECA. So we cannot, shall not, will not forget that. And we're trying to raise our game there. We are so like-minded. For the most part, we see the advent of technology and innovation the same way. We trade a great deal more. The free trade agreements that we have formed, I'll cite Colombia and Peru as great examples. Oh my gosh, their dream. Our sales to them about the same as their sales to us. Both have lifted their game. It's the definition of free trade and fair trade as I think most would want. Now, that's not to say that there's never, ever, ever an issue. Sometimes an industry group, a commodity group here or there wants to do better. They've lost something, the economics of the issue favor one or the other. And you have to work through that. Trade is never easy, but it can be more fair. So I would just say, if I have not talked about them, it was an omission on my part, and I will not forget to miss them again, because we must keep that up. It's pretty good, and I think even getting better.
Well, the Secretary, it is a big world, a lot to cover, and the short amount of time that we've given you. And I know we can do this for the next 2 or 3 hours to discuss issues of importance to all concerned. And again, we thank you so much for participating in this webinar this morning. Andrew, do you have any closing comments before we conclude this program?
Undersecretary McKinney, thank you so much for your eloquent words, for your passion, and for the hard work that you and your team do to promote U.S. agriculture every day.
Very much so.
If I can just finish out with one thing, I just want to thank all of you for these opportunities. I do believe, though sometimes messaging is hard to hear, or you maybe don't want to hear, it is what we need to continue to focus on improving people's lives around the world. I'll remind you what drives me is not having famine, not having hunger, like I spoke about so frequently and have talked to Norman Borlaug about before he passed. That's the first thing that drives me. Secondly is we've proven time and time and time again that more free trade is the answer that can benefit us all across the board than restricting. And finally, you know, restrictions just lead to many, many, many more problems and hard feelings. And so to whoever might be listening, my door is open, my phone line is open. I want to hear the things that you liked. I'll also take and be open to the things you may not have liked. So let's keep the dialogue going, and you have my promise that I'll do that for sure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Not at all, and thank you, Undersecretary. Again, hopefully in the near future, we can have you live among your peers and interested parties here in Washington, because I do agree with you that it's one thing to do this on a webinar basis, but to actually have a face-to-face shaking of the elbows introduction and discussion on a live basis, I think goes a long way in getting rid of any misunderstandings and streamlining the communication between our government and other governments around the world. So we look forward to working with you in your office moving forward. And any additional questions that may pop up after this, we will forward it to your office for any response that you may have. Again, Undersecretary McKinney, thank you, your entire staff, Julio Maldonado in particular, for putting this event together with us and being accessible and having an open door policy. And we thank you very much for your time. Thank you, sir.
I'm grateful.
And with that, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. And we look forward to having you at our next event in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a pleasant rest of the day. Thank you.